Hey guys, welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. We are in episode 3 talking about the new concept, diet autoregulation. At least it's going to be new in terms of how we define it and put some boundaries on it. So I think a lot of people have experienced these steps in the past. And the next one that we talk about, Adam, is probably going to be one of the most easy to understand. It's just macros. You get this question all the time, I'm sure. Hey, I was over 10 grams of carbs. What should I do? Can I cut out 5 grams of fat or 10 grams of protein? Like, how far do I have in between these boundaries that you set up for macros? And for some people, I even start out with some ranges, sometimes pretty narrow, sometimes a little bit wider as I'm getting a feel for somebody's metabolic capacity, Adam. But if somebody says to you, a coach, for example, you need 200 grams of carbs, does that mean 201 is too many? 195 is going to destroy, your metabolism? What is the boundary there? And so I'd like your input first, and then I'll kind of talk about what I do.
Yeah, with protein and carbs, I do look for a little bit broader range there. Now, when they're in prep, I do like a range of +10, -10. But if we're looking into non-competitors, I might go +20, -20. But the calories per gram of protein is equal per carb. So that's the easiest one to shift. If you're up 10 grams of protein, you can go down 10 grams of carbs. That will be just fine. Fat is where it gets tricky when you're losing body fat, because we just know the potential for fat storage is much greater than it would be with carbs or protein. So even though I do auto-regulate with fat, I might have a client who's having a troubled digestive system. So in that situation, I might refeed with carbs and fat and actually pull protein down to make up for those fat grams that I gave them. And that has been something that's been really significant in changing a lot of my clients with digestive issues, is just starting with that macro ratio and of course food source. But that ratio is really, really nice to flip that when you have someone with digestive issues, because fats really can help speed up digestion to some degree.
One of the things I look at too is sometimes this just gives me an indication that we need to make some changes. If somebody's always 20, 25 grams lower on protein, we may need to say, let's move that goalpost, or let's reformulate your meal plan. Let's try and find an easier source to get in there. But I also know that some people just have different days, different schedules. Life happens. And so what I like to see is if somebody, for example, is even 20 or 15 grams high or low, and they didn't have the opportunity to make up for it within that day, let's look at the week as a total metric. And so if we wanted to average, let's say 175 grams of protein a day, and you're at 180 one day, 160 the next day, 185 the next day, let's obviously try and narrow that range a little bit. But at the end of the week, that's still a good metric we can look at comparing week to week to week. So that's another place where I think a lot of people can responsibly auto-regulate. They can say, look, that's just how I was hungry or not hungry this day. My training, my schedule, things, are just not the same each day. And that's okay. I mean, I do, as long as we're seeing the progress, sometimes you just don't have to look at a single day as the only unit of measurement.
Yeah, I had a client who was over 30 grams of fat one day. So we just pulled back 5. She did accidentally, her app had something wrong in it. She was eating more fat than she realized, and she felt really bad about it. I was like, well, let's just take 5 grams away for the next 6 days and you'll be fine.
And this is why it complements training so well, because as we talk about total work in training, that's often the case. And we're going to even talk about training later in this series. But I mean, absolutely. If we wanted this many grams of carbs or protein for the entire week, that's another way just to test the plan a little bit and realize that even if you have some deviations, it's not going to kill your progress. Again, there are principled reasons why you want a certain amount of protein per day, and you don't want 600 grams one day and then none for the next 2 days. But we're not talking about those extremes. We're talking about giving you the flexibility and the autonomy to just navigate life and realize that it's really not going to impact your overall progress. So you guys stay tuned. We got several more episodes at least in this series, because we want to really dig into defining how this can help you with greater flexibility still achieve all your goals. Hey guys, welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. We are in episode 4 of Diet Autoregulation. Adam, let's move into meal spacing. We mentioned that a little bit in the introduction to the topic, but some days you're going to have 4 meals, some days 5, some days 6, maybe even 2 or 3 on a weekend. How important is it for your planning with a client that they stick to something? Did you ever say, look, you got to have this many meals per day and this is why, or are you pretty loose with that instruction?
I'm pretty loose with it because as long as you really space out your protein, there's not going to be any greater benefit aside from there's like one research study out there that says if you eat a bigger meal at night, you might sleep better. So clients that have a hard time sleeping, I might be more specific with them eating more at night. But I am pretty loose with that just because it's great for the client's mentality. They're less likely to burn out. I've had clients who, they can enjoy going shopping, and if they're not hungry, they can skip a meal and enjoy more time out with their family, and then they can kind of catch up when they get home. Is it always a perfect scenario? No, but it doesn't have much of an impact on their progress at all. And we know if they're only doing this 1 or 2 days out of the week, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So the meal spacing is probably the least thing that I'm very specific about, just because going back to our ladder series, timing is one of the least important parts of the puzzle.
And I know for kind of a normal day, whether you're training or not training, you may pack the pre and post workout into one meal. Maybe on the weekends or days that you're sleeping more, you just don't need as many meals. So there are some of those things that just seem like a no-brainer. But what about kind of an extreme thing that you may be planning? What if it's my anniversary and I'm going to have a really big meal? Is it okay for me to stash away and save some calories and then have half of my calories or 70% of them at one time?
Yeah, I do that. I have clients who get lunch catered in sometimes, and they sometimes need to use their refeed to fit it in, especially if it's something they really like, anniversaries, birthdays. We can absolutely fit that in. The biggest thing on planning that is staying ahead of your hunger. You don't want a client to keep calories so low that they're just astronomically hungry by the time they get to the meal that they wanted to have. Planning that meal ahead of time as best as you can is really important. So then you can prevent yourself from just putting your phone away, not tracking it, and then basically having a binge happen. So prior planning is really important with this because your hunger can get away from you. So that's the biggest balance with this act. But you can do it and you can plan for it and you can do it effectively. And I think a lot of my clients are a little looser about their meal timing on weekends, especially if they're not training versus their structure during the week. And I would say 90% of the world population that diets is that way as well.
Well, we hope so. But a lot of people who follow rigid meal planning, they really are taught, no, I must eat 6 meals a day and they must be 3 hours apart and they must include this. So I think you're hitting on some really important points. And one is that everybody does respond a little differently. I know people who may almost kind of fast through a day to have that larger meal. And then they're voracious and they don't even enjoy the meal. They just kind of eat till they're sick. And then it wasn't even that fun. Other people, though, feel like, their stomach kind of shrinks a little bit and they're just, they are okay. They're not that hungry at that meal and they still have a nice meal and they enjoy it. Other people use little tricks, like maybe I'll eat pretty sparsely throughout that day, but then I'll make sure I have a little bit of a snack before I go into that meal, just kind of dampen that hunger. But I agree, if you're not doing that all the time, if you're just whatever, and we're not even talking about high calorie days, no, anything like that. This is just your normal daily life. You can still do this and work your macronutrients, your calorie base into varying meal plans, even this extreme, you just have to have a plan and watch and understand your own experiences prior.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys, stay tuned. We're going to move into a couple more things, eventually even getting into how to adjust training with this. So we'll see you next time in Contest Prep University.